A new group called the West Virginia Climate Alliance has recently released a citizen's guide to climate change, which outlines some of the causes, impacts, and potential solutions to climate change issues in the state.
And one of our objectives was to try to cut through some of the misinformation that's been put out there. And what it really means is relying on the science and the scientists and looking at an abundance of scientific consensus around the causes and effects of climate change. And, I think what has happened with this issue is it's become very politicized.
To understand climate change, you first have to understand the role of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. If you think of these gases as forming a thin layer around the planet, when the sun's rays reach the Earth, a lot of the rays bounce back into space. The gases help to contain some of the rays so that we can enjoy some warmth. But if the layer of greenhouse gases gets too thick, the heat can't escape so easily, thus creating the climate change effect. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the past 6 years have been the hottest years since 1880. As air becomes warmer, it can hold more water. This means the globe is experiencing what is called a water cycle intensification. More water evaporates into the air and more rain falls down to the earth. When more water evaporates, it can cause drought or extremely dry weather. Also, wildfires are more likely to start and spread when the weather is dry. Of course, hotter temperatures also means that ice caps will start to melt, raising the sea level. The raise in sea level combined with more water in the air causes more intense weather events like hurricanes and typhoons.
A lot of my lens on climate change and water comes from my time in the military. I'm a veteran. When I think about water and climate change, I think about national security. And national security is having the resources for our internal economy, but also having healthy communities and opportunities for the workforce and the people. So it's really a national security issue to rethink how we treat the environment and how we try to keep our economy running.
What we're still learning about is the effect on things like invasive species and pests and disease. One I've read some about is like the presence of ticks that cause Lyme disease that can make people very sick. So a changing climate means a changing habitat, which means some of our native species may not survive and invasive species come in and puts the whole system out of balance to where we could be exposed to more pests and invasive species that could have deleterious effects on our health, also our food systems.
Scientists are now determining that carbon dioxide breaks down in the atmosphere at a much slower rate than other gases. The Environmental Protection Agency has said that carbon dioxide emissions last thousands of years in the atmosphere, meaning that carbon dioxide emissions from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s are still having an effect on the planet. So how much carbon dioxide is too much? A movement involving top-level scientists across the globe have determined that keeping levels under 350 ppm will help us avoid most catastrophic and irreversible climate change effects. In 2016, the world passed the 400 ppm threshold, and in September, we reached 415 ppm. Considering how far we are ahead of the safe number and how long carbon dioxide lasts in the air, scientists are now saying that simply reducing future carbon dioxide emissions is not enough. We would need to get to the point of negative emissions. In other words, we would need to take carbon dioxide out of the air. One example of a way we could do this is to plant more trees, which naturally soak up the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But perhaps the biggest challenge to fixing climate change is the misinformation surrounding it. There's plenty of evidence online that fossil fuel companies have been using clever marketing, lobbying, and research funding to discredit climate change. As one example, a group called the Union of Concerned Scientists released a climate deception dossier in 2015 that contains copies of internal company documents from fossil fuel companies that showed a deliberate attempt to mislead the public.
The science has almost been quieted by this whole political and partisan rhetoric that accompanies climate change. And it's hard to decouple that because there are industries, particularly fossil fuel industries and transportation, that will be heavily affected. And they have a lot at stake, and they have a lot of influence in politics, and have enjoyed that.
Of course, a big talking point of this past election was the issue of climate change, or rather, what ought to be done about it. In the end, Joe Biden became the president-elect, and he has expressed an interest in policies that addressed climate change. But West Virginia's voice is often left out of that discussion when we arguably have the most at stake. On the next installment of Climate Change in West Virginia.
Who the hell cares about climate change 10, 20, 50 years down the line when, I'm trying to put food on the table?
There's a transition going on away from coal as the world and the country addresses climate change. And that transition is going to continue. We're not going to be able to stop it.
How can you possibly keep people in the state and recruit businesses to the state if there isn't the certainty that the workforce are going to have clean, reliable, safe water?